Welcome back to Within Tolerance, a podcast for machinists by a machinist. I'm your host, Dylan Jackson of Proteum Machining, and this week I am joined by Jim Vandeveld of HMC Manufacturing. Welcome, Jim.
Hey, Dylan, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me.
Hey, thanks for having me, man.
So before we get into your backstory, what is HMC? What do you do? Where can people find you online? All the good stuff.
HMC is a Hellion Machine Collective, formerly Knives, and then in the last few months, I've kind of transitioned to manufacturing. I kind of changed my outlook on where I wanted to go with my business and what I wanted to be able to offer people. And so I kind of had like a name transition. You can find me at hmc.mfg on Instagram. That's where I'm most active. It is still hmcknives.com if people wanted to visit the website. Yeah. So I make knives currently, both for myself. And at this time, I'm transitioning into making components for other people, specifically other knife makers, guys that, for the most part, I have experience with, both on a personal and professional level, just to kind of aid in the communication and transition as I kind of learn how to provide this service to other folks, and I know these guys, they know me. It kind of allows us to be a little bit more open and honest with what we want, right? Sometimes when you're working with somebody that you don't know, specifically on the customer end, maybe it's hard to communicate what you want, how you want it, when you need it. And so by working with guys that I know, it's kind of allowed a more open communication, which has been really de-stressing, specifically because I'm kind of an eclectic person. I do things a certain way. And so sometimes I catch myself maybe not sharing all the details that I should just because I'm thinking them. And these guys are able to say to me, hey, we need to communicate better about this. And that's been a pretty cool thing for me. Like I said, de-stressing, because not to jump too far ahead, but this is kind of a side business for me. I do spend my days going in another direction with manufacturing. And so if this isn't cool, if it's not fun, if it's not saying that there aren't days where I want to pull my hair out, but if this isn't something that's adding value to my life beyond like a financial motivation, then I would just stay at my day job, right?
Totally. Yeah.
I kind of lose my train of thought a little bit here.
Well, you mentioned your day job, so let's actually take it all the way back. How did you get into manufacturing in general? How did you get to the point where you now feel comfortable taking out other people's babies and, making their parts for their, knives or tools or whatever?
Sure.
How did you get to?
Okay, so I guess we can kind of rewind to 2009. So I went to college for biology. And at the end of that experience, I didn't really have the opportunities there that I was looking for with regard to what I wanted for my life. I specifically knew at a young age, I come from a big family, and I knew that I wanted to have a family. And I knew that an undergraduate salary for that position wasn't going to provide me what I wanted nearly as quickly as I wanted to. So ironically, before manufacturing, I was going to become an electrician. That was my idea, union here in Pennsylvania, where I'm from. And I wasn't able to get into their program, and I spent like 6 months working in a lighting and electrical supply warehouse. And during that time, actually kind of a distant relation to me, I wouldn't say maybe distant, but my mom's cousin's husband actually approached her at a Christmas party and said, hey, what's Jimmy up to? And she said, oh, he's kind of bumming around working this warehouse job at a lighting and electrical supply place. And he said, well, would he have any interest in being a tool and die maker? And my mom said, well, I don't know what that is, but I'll pass it along to him. And so she called me the next day and said, hey, I talked to so-and-so, and he wanted to know if you had any interest in doing an apprenticeship for him in tool and die. And I said, I don't know what that is, but I'm not happy with what I'm doing. I'll go talk to him. So actually, the shop that I work at now was only about 5 blocks away from where I was working then. So on my lunch break, I drove up and I talked to him, and he said, yeah, we have this thing. We're always looking for new blood. If you're interested, fill out an application, drop it off, and we'll go from there. So I had walked around the shop. It was a clean environment, kind of loud, smelled funny, but it was foreign to me, and it seemed exciting. And at that time in my life, I was like, well, the pay seems good. There's overtime. I don't have any real direction. let's give this a shot. So I filled out my application, ironically spelled die wrong. I spelled it DYE instead of DIE because how am I supposed to know? And so anyhow, I started, what ended up being a 5.5 year apprenticeship that was supposed to be 4 years at that company that I still work for now. We build injection molds, specifically hot runner molds. And so for the first year, actually, it was more like 18 months. I worked in the tool room of one of our molding divisions. So not only do we manufacture the injection molds, but we actually have several injection molding facilities in the area that actually run the plastic parts. So at that time, my boss said, "Hey, before we even get you introduced to the manufacturing process, we want you to understand how an injection mold works, how to maintain it, what's critical, what's not critical." And so they stuck me in this dirty, loud building for a year and a half where I disassembled and reassembled these molds, inspected components to understand, where the wear and damage happened with what happened in the molding processes. I got to spend time working in the presses that open and close and, make the plastic parts themselves, and understand, how the controls for the presses operate the molds, and, just a lot of troubleshooting stuff. It was a dirty job. And at that time, it was very frustrating because it was tiring, and it was my first experience working with like shop personalities. I come from a very white collar family, and I really didn't have any experience with blue collar people, which seems silly to say now, but at that time it was just my truth. Everybody that I knew went to college, and I come from, on my dad's side, a family of 6 or 7 lawyers, and on my mom's side something similar. Everybody's a professional. So actually, I don't know if you have ever experienced this, but my skin was relatively thin going into this. So it was kind of a cool opportunity with people that I wasn't going to spend working the rest of my career with, to kind of be sensitive and get, shit talk to me, and kind of develop understand how to communicate with people in a shop environment. So
yeah, it is very different. If you haven't worked in a shop before, you got something coming to you for sure.
Yeah, it's very different. And it's one of those things where I actually now, in the last year or 2 years, maybe even as recently as that, have had to learn how to take the shop out of myself when I'm not in the shop, because a lot of times you end up coming off pretty brash or brazen, and people can can sometimes get offended. And we'll circle back to why that's been happening more recently than it had in the past. But so I got through my 18 months of indentured servitude over at the molding division, and I started at the tool shop. So it was, just 200 yards away, door to door. And so every apprenticeship is different, but when I first walked in the door, they had 4 Bridgeports, and I got stuck with a crusty old timer, 65, 70-year-old guy that was at the tail end of his career, that trained apprentices. And I learned how to, tram in a Bridgeport head. I spent 12 months working with him. And I learned how to square up parts, and I learned how to, like I said, tram in a Bridgeport head, and I learned how to operate basic metrology tools, run a set of mics, a set of idiot sticks. I learned how to run a manual lathe. I spent that time. This was literally my first time ever seeing anything made. Even in the molding division, we didn't make anything over there. We just maintained these molds, and it was pretty much like a mechanic's job for an injection mold. And so I was fascinated, right? I see, there's these cutting tools that are, making chips, and it's loud, and get to walk around the shop, and at a distance get to kind of see what these parts are looking like as they're going through the finishing processes. But I have no respect or understanding of what any of these processes really do. And even coming out of that first year, I still didn't have any idea. All I knew how to do was run a Bridgeport, and run a manual lathe. So once I had like a basic machining concepts understanding, like, hey, this is how you square up a part in a vise, I was removed from the Bridgeport environment, and actually I got stuck in mold assembly, which was just like a cleaner version of what I had done for 18 months. And in a lot of ways, it was frustrating, right? Because you're working with new steel. So everything, you have something that somebody, umpteen people spent how much time making, and it's your job to, make it, keep it looking pretty while you put it together, because when this mold leaves the shop, you want it to be perfect. As where, I was used to working with battered, broken, welded, remachined pieces of junk. not junk, but stuff that was far from perfect.
Right.
Also, what was kind of cool about this mold assembly job was that when you're assembling a new mold, like from engineering, every print, every component's toleranced, and obviously, theoretically, this thing should work, but all these parts go through a lot of hands, and everybody has a different inspection process, blah, blah, blah. So inherently, you start putting all these mold components together, and you start to build the stack up, and there's issues. So, I got to work with some guys that were great mold assemblers, great technical mold assemblers over the course of the next year, which is not, this is really not how the apprenticeship probably should have moved. There should probably have been a more stringent pathway to the end of it. But we were in kind of a transition period as a shop where we were kind of getting with the state of Pennsylvania, the curriculum for the tool and die apprenticeship was changing. And so there was like a disconnect in the first couple of years of my apprenticeship where like I wasn't getting the bookwork that I was supposed to be getting. The shop was insanely busy. And so it was like, do we want to detract from what these guys are trying to accomplish to like move this guy around and like train him up? But so consequently, I got stuck in eddies a lot. I was kind of spinning my tires just in the back corner of whatever I was doing. But I would often reflect back to a conversation that I had with one of the guys that was like an ex-tool maker that was working in like the tool room at the molding division. He said to me, when you get over there, you're going to do stuff that sucks. And it's your job to try and focus on being the absolute best that you can be at any job, no matter how much it sucks. Because if you're an expert at it, you're going to take what you can, you're going to appreciate it, and then you're going to appreciate the next job that doesn't suck nearly as much, a hell of a lot more. So as I would get stuck in these eddies and I would be spinning my tires frustratedly as a kid in his early 20s, I would remember back to that. Just try and be the best version of whatever this job requires as possible. And what was awesome was that that was noticed, because there was a period of time prior to me arriving at the shop where they had a lot of apprentices that would get a year or two in and would drop out, or they would be lackluster, not interested, as a lot of young kids are getting into anything. You don't know who you are, or what you want, or how to work hard. I mean, depending on your upbringing, but I certainly didn't. But I was motivated because it was gratifying to learn. I was picking up on it pretty quickly. I wouldn't say I had any kind of a mechanical mindset growing up, but for some reason this was clicking with me. I was finding satisfaction in like learning these new processes and taking on knowledge from people that had decades of experience. And so moving forward, I guess. So I went through the mold assembly portion of this, and after 2 years, was able to experience my first CNC machine. You hear and see these guys, they're using CAM and CAD, and you're watching those machines do what you were doing manually, and it was kind of fascinating at a distance, but I had zero experience other than just walking by these machines. So I got put on it was like a mid-90s Akuma 3-axis mill 40 taper machine with a guy that was crusty. He was probably in his late 30s, definitely didn't want to work with me, was really frustrated that I was looking over his shoulder, and retrospectively didn't really know what he was doing. and so
that's probably why I didn't want you looking over his shoulder, because he didn't even know what he was doing.
Yeah. I mean, listen, he was a guy that had worked there for 15 years and kind of did what he did a lot of machine control programming, and did not have a lot of CAM experience. And so the 6 months that I spent working with him, it was really hard for him to translate more than like, hey, here's a CAN cycle in the machine control. This is how you set up a subroutine, But as far as like anything associated with our CAM software, like he would program it and I would just sit there and watch it, push the button, load parts, and inspect stuff. So naturally, I was a robust. I've always been an opinionated person, and I'm definitely one of the kind of person that like learns the hard way, and I don't take advice well. I know that about myself. I didn't really know it at the time. I was just being myself, but turns out that like paving your own way while trying to learn from like a toolmaker at one of these shops, like those two things just don't mix. And so I ended up leaving like just about every place that within the shop that I worked at, like with a guy that was probably happy I was leaving, liked me a little bit less than when I showed up, but had passed along as much knowledge as he possibly could. And so anyhow, after 6 months of running these Akuma mills with this guy, and he and I butting heads. My foreman and my general manager noticed that I did have an aptitude for it. Just my attention to detail was pretty high, and they felt like I was capable of more than what I was going to be able to learn in that soft milling environment. So about halfway through my apprenticeship, they said to me, "Hey, we have this guy over here. He runs a pair of Makino V33 hard mills. He does all of our hard milling. We want you to go over there and just start to get your feet wet with what he does, how he does it." Because this guy, who ended up becoming a great friend of mine, actually was a farmer too. He had a family farm, and he oftentimes during planting or harvest would leave early. They found him leaving at inconvenient times, and they accommodated it. He worked crazy hard, was very efficient with like lights out machining from like a non-robotic perspective. He did everything he could, but they kind of were like, "Hey, we kind of want to get somebody else at least knowing how to run his machines, understanding his programming style, so that when he's not here or he takes a week off because he's harvesting, like we can have a young guy that's a little bit knowledgeable about his processes." And what was supposed to be 3 months ended up being 2.5 years. And I ended up finding that hard milling scratched every itch that I had for the machining process. I was great at it. I worked well with this other guy. And I ended up having a pretty rushed conclusion to my apprenticeship. I moved through the other processes in the bare minimum amount of time, in tool and die, that's surface grinding, EDM. We have wire and sinker, but it was sinker EDM. And then I actually did spend a little bit of time in electrode manufacturing too.
Oh, cool.
But yeah, it was cool. It was very cool. Carbon's a completely different animal. But
oh yeah.
So
but they kind of found you. They found their new hard milling guy, and they're like, "Oh shit, we got to get him through the rest of this so we can get him back to the hard mill."
Yeah, exactly, man. Exactly. And I didn't really realize it at the time when I was getting into hard milling, but I would think back to the first time that I walked through the shop. My first interview with the general manager, and we walked around the shop, and I remember specifically these big cavity plates, and by big I mean they were 12 by 16, as big as the work envelope would allow in the hard mills. And I saw this shiny finished part. I saw these nicely broken edges, the beautiful look of what some would call chattery hard mill finish, on just hardened steel. And I remember touching it, the visceral feeling of all the softened edges and just what that piece kind of represented to me as a layman looking at it. And I actually remember thinking to myself, I want to make stuff like that. And then I forgot about it. And then I fast forwarded 3.5 years, and all, before you know it, I'm here doing that. So now in 2022, that guy that trained me ended up moving on to, we got a Mori NMV 5000 5-axis hard mill with the pallet pool, and he ended up taking that over. And so it left me to run these two hard mills, to be kind of the sole hard milling guy. Obviously the Mori's capable, but he spent a lot of time doing soft steel just because it was efficient, with the robot and that. And so yeah, now I would call myself more of a machine specialist than a tool and die maker, although I'm, intimately familiar with all the processes, simply because, at the back end of a tool and die shop, everybody works together, and I really have to know what the other processes are capable of, what they like, what they're planning to do. There's a lot of coordination that kind of has to happen in tool and die that I think makes it really unique, right? There's I would say four finishing processes. If you think about how a part moves through a tool shop, when you're just talking about hard, it's all steel. We don't use any, obscure alloys. There's no aluminum in injection mold making for what we're doing. We all do finished molds, no rapid prototyping or anything. But, you're going to have post heat treat, surface grind, hard mill, EDM, and wire EDM. For us anyways, I guess hard turning technically too, but we don't do a ton of that. And so, we all have to work together in a way that I think, and maybe this is a gross generalization, right? But if I think about maybe an aerospace shop or a job shop, that's maybe you turn a part, and if it doesn't have live tooling or anything like that, maybe you're doing a second operation in a mill. But I don't think that there's nearly the intimacy that you experience in tool and die, because there's a lot of things that only one facet's capable of. There's wire features that are wired that you can't hard mill. There's features that are burned in the sinker EDMs that like you can't hard mill. And there's grindable things that are grindable, but that are faster to do in other facets of machining. So we have like this really core group of guys that like really intimately understand each other's processes. And that has kind of allowed me to like understand them without actually doing them at a high level and develop like an awesome respect for that and the guys that do that stuff. And as, technologies progress, like these guys will talk about how 20 years ago, well, we had to be great at everything because, we would mill up all of our own components and get them heat treated. And then I would grind them and then I would make the electrodes and I would burn them. They always reflect back on like when it was like a single cavity, I did everything deal. And everything has become so specialized, like as cavitation levels and molds increase, like the molds are bigger. They're more, the features, the 3D features are more complicated. Like there's just no way that any one human could ever take a job start to finish. And there was like there was pushback in our shop at one time where guys would get maybe frustrated, like that these apprentices were settling into things that they excelled at. And they weren't well-rounded and you don't understand what I do. And because they're putting you with me and only with me, you're going to take my job. There was like a weird timing where there was like a lot of competitiveness there. And this was kind of happening at the front of my apprenticeship. And so now that feels like the distant past, even though maybe it was only 6, 7, 8 years ago. But yeah, I now would refer to myself as a hard milling specialist and maybe not a tool and die maker, which I'm proud of because I love hardened steel and I love cutting it. So I guess that kind of closes up like my chapter of, it gets you to where HMC kind of started to be born.
Yeah. So real quick, before we go on to that, it sounds like maybe this company is medical work because it seems like there's a lot of medical stuff up in PA.
Actually, we do almost all like health, beauty, cosmetic stuff.
Okay.
And to be more specific, like a lot of deodorant work, a lot of deodorant molds.
Oh, very interesting.
Yeah. So like this, I take it for granted, but like something kind of cool, like we make our molding divisions mold every single Degree, Axe, and Old Spice deodorant stick that's distributed worldwide. So like all those molds that make those, every single one of them was made at our shop. Which, when you think about it, it's kind of crazy, And there's obviously quite a few in each lineup, but I'd say that like 90% of what I work on is related to that. Caps, barrels, screws. Obviously, we're always doing other stuff. We have two tool shops. I mean, I feel like a lot of the cosmetic stuff ends up going over there. But we'll do stuff like baby wipe tubs, Nescafe. It was just like a plastic cap, like caps for things. Wrigley gum. We have a lot of projects with Wrigley, specifically like this plastic. If you ever go to the store, you see like an overpriced packet of gum, like $5-6. It's in like a hard plastic case that folds open. Like we made the molds for that kind of stuff.
That must be really gratifying to be able to see like the direct results of your efforts, like on shelves everywhere.
Dude, it's pretty crazy. It's satisfying, but it also makes you realize that nobody pays attention to any of that stuff. It's like most people wouldn't even realize that like Degree and Axe are the exact same deodorant packages with a different cap and they're different colors. Like if you look at them, literally they're the same thing. Small things like that, like nuanced stuff where I'm like, I'm looking at plastic parts for flash spec. Like, oh, there's a little string of plastic sticking off here, and like you think to like as a consumer, they don't give a crap about any of that shit. No. the things that we work so diligently to like prevent from happening, and it's like, oh, this part that you spent however long making the mold for, yeah, they throw that away. That plastic factory seal, as soon as you lift the cap off the deodorant stick, like, that goes right into the garbage, And like I think about like the umpteen numbers of hours that I've spent machining cavities and cores for those, like just the stress from it, and it's like literally a throwaway piece. And then it makes you realize we live in a disposable society, and maybe it undermines what you do just a little bit, and you shelf that mentality and put it away, and then you try and make yourself feel good again. But so we do HBA stuff predominantly.
That's really cool though. And then what machines and CAM software are you guys using? It sounds like Machinos.
So we kind of have a clusterfuck of machines. So actually my machines, the Machinos are the only ones in the shop that we have a pair of. Yeah, on it, dude. I mean, yeah, I've been spoiled. It's made home manufacturing an absolute nightmare. There's such a huge disparity between what I have now and what I run at work that like I've had to there's a lot of moments I have to step back and just understand what I'm working with here. But yeah, so we have a couple of Mazak 6080 dual column vertical mills that we use for manufacturing mold bases, which are like the big plates that all the components for the molds mount into.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have a big tombstone Mazak horizontal. I don't know the model. It's huge though. I mean, it's, it has a mezzanine on it and a big, it rotates and there's, giant tombstone in the back and it's cool. It's a big machine. I don't know anything about it. We have Akuma multi-axis mill turning center. We have Micron 5-axis Trode machine. I don't know any of the models off the top of my head. With a robot, which is where we also have a couple Bostomatic, like older Trode cutting machines. We have that Mori NMV 5000 5-axis mill, and then a bunch of like GF Synchro EDMs. There's like 6 of them, different sizes, like 22s and like 455s. And then also have like 3 Charmy wire machines, and then 8 or 9 Okamoto 612 wet grinders, a bunch of surface grinders. We actually just like, I think the latest acquisition, we got a laser welder. I don't know if
cool.
you're too familiar with that, but that's actually kind of revolutionized our process, and it makes it like infinitely easier to get away with fucking shit up because you make a mistake and like my best buddy is in the laser welding room right next to me. I could be like, hey, just throw a dot of weld on this really quick. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, you gouge the tool into this or whatever. We actually, another thing we're toying with now is like a 3D printing, like laser sintering. So we got like a small, I don't know the brand, but a laser 3D printer, which we're still working the kinks out on that, but that's, in tool and die, like they want to print parts finished. I think the only real like solid application, aside from like the massive amounts of unattended time that like 3D printing allows, is that like you can print, like, I guess we would call it conformal cooling, like water lines within 3D parts that are like not traditionally machinable with like even 3-axis or multi-axis drilling functions. You can print water channels that like directly follow like 3D shapes to try and increase the effectiveness of the water cooling, which in plastic, in injection molding, the faster you can cool the part, the faster you can open the mold, the faster you can eject the part, the faster you can close it, the faster you can make more parts. So the faster we can cool that part, the more effectively, the more cycles per minute, the more cycles per hour, parts per hour we can mold. So with this, with this laser sinter 3D printing, we can make some pretty weird cooling shapes. And that's mostly what we're trying to prove out now is, how do you do this, but how do you print it in a way that it doesn't leak water, right? Like there's a porosity problem there.
Right.
Where if you try to go too fast, like obviously you're going to leak water. It's, that this is something in the last 6 months we've just been exploring, and it's very interesting. But from what I can see at an arm's length away, it's also kind of frustrating. So I think that's in our future, but I don't know. I kind of, in some ways, hope that it's not, just because it does take away from a lot of the work that a lot of the guys in the shop do. If you're not programming and working on fixturing, like, no, we're going to literally weld this thing from nothing on this build plate, wire it off, and then like do some like really basic machining operations and then kick it out the door. That's kind of a daunting thing, right? But
the ones that seem like they make the most sense in your world, or at least from an outsider's perspective, are like the combination machines. Like Sodic has the one that does laser weld or laser deposition and machining, so it'll like deposit and weld a layer, machine that layer, and then build that up that way. And that way you get all of the high end hard milled surface finishes that you need, plus all the conformal cooling and all that.
Yeah, absolutely. That actually, my first exposure to that was at IMTS, I think I want to say maybe 2014. I saw a DMG machine doing that, and it was like kind of mind blowing. It was more, I think it wasn't as much milling. I think it was like laser sintering and then turning. But
cool.
Still, very, very cool. And that's something that I know they're kind of wading through. That's kind of a big investment. Not that any of this stuff is cheap, but I definitely agree.
I think those are like $750,000 or $1 million, though they're like serious money.
Yeah, serious money. And so I think you really need to prove out that you need it. And I respect that. I mean, even the stuff that we have now, like this small machine, like, man, the build area on it's like maybe 5 by 5 inches. Like, it's so small. And I think it was still a couple $100,000. So it's, but I guess you get that with anything. But
well, then let's get back to HMC. So how did you come up with the idea of wanting to start making knives, and then how did you go about it? And then what does your shop look like now?
Yeah. So it was in 2015. So I had been hard milling for 3.5 years, something like that. 3 years. I have a good buddy, one of my oldest friends locally, who was a carpenter at the time, and he's always been like into martial arts and into weaponry and training and stuff that's outside of my realm of understanding. But he started to hand make some basic fixed blade knives, and he came to me when he finished his first one and he showed me, and I said, "Oh man, that's awesome, dude. Like, I'd love to buy that from you. I want to buy your first one." So I bought his knife. And at that time, I actually have to reflect. Before then, he had said to me, like, "Hey, man, do you want to give this knife making thing a try?" And I'm like, "Ah, no, dude. I don't have time for that. I got a real job, man. I'm a machinist, Like, I can't be making no knives." And so he went ahead and with somebody else built this first knife, and I looked at it and I said, "This thing's cool. This is awesome, dude." But inherently, the machinist in me looks at something handmade, and I start to pick out flaws and inconsistencies, and it's just, man, if a robot made this, it'd be a hell of a lot more perfect, just being arrogant. Obviously didn't say these things to him, but at that time I had been on Instagram for like machining stuff. I had like a machining account where I kind of like on the low shared pictures of stuff I probably shouldn't have shared pictures of, stuff that I was making. And I had never delved into the world of custom knives. I wasn't a knife guy. I had owned a couple of knives, but it wasn't like anything that really interested me. I wasn't, like head over heels enamored with it and always wishing that I could make them. But when he started this, he started a knife Instagram account and he started tagging people and like kind of showing me, "Man, look at how much these knives sell for, blah, blah, blah." It was like, holy crap, man, there's a whole industry here. And so, like I said, looking at his, I'm like, man, I could design something like this. Like, I'm a CAD wizard. Oh, this, to take a step back, you had asked what CAD CAM software we use at my day job. We use Creo.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah. And I think mostly because of the like PDM link, like this file management side of it, it works great for like between our engineering department and the manufacturing centers. It's like we at that time hadn't really found another software that interfaced and worked as well as like Creo did for that application. Now, we've been exploring switching just because the cost gets astronomical. But anyways, so Creo is what we used. But I said, I can design a knife in Creo, and I want to try and make one. I didn't have a machine or anything at this time, and I went to my foreman and I said to him, "Hey, I kind of want to make a couple knives for my buddies. Is there any way that I could, after hours, like if I have time, like, sneak a little bit of work in?" And he's like, and this may be even now as he still works there isn't something I should talk about, but he said, "Yeah, you can slip it in if you can fit it in there, you can mess around with it." So I designed a knife, and I didn't really understand much about the fixturing side of it, but I cut out some basic blanks and I machined the bevels because I didn't have any other equipment. And my good buddy said, "Hey, you made those parts. Let's just kind of collaborate. I'll go through it with you. I'll show you how to make handles and I'll show you how to make sheaths and we'll sharpen them and stuff like that." So I ended up actually making 10 of these things for 10 of my closest friends, and Chris kind of collaborated on the rest of it, and I got exposure to working with synthetic materials by hand. He had like a little shop in his backyard with like Harbor Freight equipment, like a little 1x30 grinder and a drill press, and he had like a rudimentary forge where we heat treated these things, and retrospectively they did not get hard, but we didn't have any way to test it besides skating a file across them, and we made these knives, right? And like we dipped them in acid and we stone washed them, and all my bevel marks, my machining tool paths could be seen, and there was nothing sexy about it, but it was accomplishing, right? Like, this is great. So we finished these 10. I distributed them to my buddies. They were bulky. They weren't sexy. They weren't refined. They weren't anything, but I made them. And it was at this time that I started to think to myself, like, man, I need to find a way to take all that my day job has taught me and to kind of spin it in a direction. You hear guys that are like, "Oh, I started a side business and it's drastically different than what I do at my day job." And I love it. And I think to myself, why would I spend time learning something completely new when these people just invested probably hundreds of thousands of dollars into teaching me how to do this thing? Why wouldn't I find a way to make that make money for me? And like, I can be fully honest, like when I got into making knives, it was not for the passion side of it. It was for the business, and it was to make money. I saw, man, people sell these knives for hundreds of dollars, and I want a piece of that action. And like, I don't know anything about like the community aspect of it. I don't know anything about the market. I just know I see people making stuff that's crappier than what I think I can make, and they're selling it for a lot of money. I could probably make it faster and sell it for a little bit less and still do pretty well. So little did I find out after I ate a ridiculous amount of humble pie that if you're not in it for the passion and you're not in it for the progression of the craft, and you're just in it for the money, you're going to fizzle out pretty quickly. But anyways, so Chris and I got a shop together downtown, in downtown area, about 15 minutes from my house. I said, hey, I want to do this, but listen, I can't work in this garage in your backyard that doesn't have heat or air conditioning or anything. We need to get a small shop somewhere. So we found a room in this building downtown, and it was small. I mean, it was probably 12 by 20, but it was cheap. We each paid $100 a month. We had a couple 110 outlets, and it was a space to call our own. So we sat there and we built it out, and I had a couple bucks laying around, and I just bought the basic equipment that he didn't have, that I said, again, the machinist in me, the process-driven guy, says, dude, if we're going to do this, we need to do it a little bit more right. So we need to get a heat treat oven, and we need to get a real grinder, and we need to get a mill, a benchtop mill. And, we need to have all the things that we need to like kind of do this just a little bit better than how we're doing it now. So I said to him, if you can help me get the shop built out and continue to kind of guide me, I'll kick all the money into this and we'll get this going. You can share my stuff, and then you can transition into buying your own stuff as you're making more knives. So we got set up, and pretty quickly realized we outgrew this room in about 2 months.
Oh, no.
So, around that time, the guy that managed the building had another space open up on the other side of the building, and this was 800 square feet, and it was only $200 more a month. So we gutted the room that we were in, we moved everything over and kind of laid it out. And over the course of, to fast forward beyond this, the next 2 years, maybe a year and a half, we shared that space together. I made a couple hundred fixed blade knives, each getting progressively better, growing customer base, all while working my day job. And actually, it was interesting, right? So that was 2016. I say January 1st, 2016 is when I actually started making knives. And I had come, in tool and die, at least in our shop, it's a very overtime driven trade. We operate pretty lean. Like, there's not like a plethora of guys. We don't have like a crate of 3 shifts. It's, 2 shifts, 10 to 12 hours a shift, and really just have a second shift group of guys at the machines that needed to be running 24 hours a day. So I'm coming off of a career where at this time I'm 7 years into it. And I bet you, I'm averaging 65 to 70 hours a week, 7 days a week, every week, months and months on end. And so when I started this whole knife making thing, it was really casual, right? Because I had, at this time in 2016, I had 3 kids, and I just, I said to my wife, I need something besides work. She saw that it was kind of slowly sucking my soul away. And then 6 months into my knife making journey, so I worked a 60-hour week in June. I went on vacation. I came back a week later, and we were cut to 40 hours, and 7 guys got laid off.
Oh,
and
wow.
This was the first time in my career, quote unquote, that I had ever experienced this being slow. I mean, there was a time in 2011 and in 2012 where we were working 85 hours a week straight. It was just jamming. Like, this could never end. I was making $11.50 an hour. I was the richest man that I ever, that I had ever done. Like, I look back now and it's like, man, we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars at my current hourly rate. But I was, at that time, oh man, I'm making $1,000 a week or whatever it was. Like, I'm loaded, and it just, I'm growing my family, and we bought a house, and so anyway, so that the bottom fell out of my day job for a little while, for 6 months. And that coincided with me kind of getting my wings with knives, and knives carried me through that time. I was making fixed blades. They weren't that nice, but I had people that wanted them, and I was working at the shop downtown for 30 hours a week. Chris and I, assholes to elbows, just we were feeding off each other. And, and even social media at that time was different, right? Where, Instagram didn't have the algorithm in place. And if you made a post every day, you gained 70 followers, and like, our accounts were growing and our demand was growing, and we were learning and we were having fun, and it felt cool. And so, yeah, that I look back fondly at that time, because I don't think if I was spending that 30 hours a week at the shop that I ever would have been able to pursue knives the way that I was pursuing them. So again, at this time, I'm still hand making everything. I had, my stuff water jetted, and then I was, hand making handles and blending things and hand grinding. And I decided at that time I need to try and buy my first machine. I knew obviously that I was not going to get anything close to what I was running at work, but found Tormach. We worked on the third floor of this building with no service elevator, so I had no way to rig a machine in. And so I, at that time, decided we're going to look at this Tormach 440. Comes in, we have a non-freight elevator, and the heaviest part of this machine weighs like 450 pounds. So if I can get it onto a dolly and I can get it through the door, we can get this thing up here and I can start making parts. So I went ahead and I bought a Tormach 440, and we got it into that shop down there. And this is how woefully under-equipped that shop was. We had like two 20-amp breakers to like the entire space. No dedicated electricity. Literally could just put the lights on. We couldn't even run the heat treat oven and a grinder at the same time on the same circuit because in the middle of a heat treating cycle, it would trip the breaker and it would just be a mass chaos. So I had said to the guy that was kind of managing the building at the time, like, hey man, I'm getting this machine. It runs on 110. I just need one dedicated outlet, please, for me to get this machine running. And he said, yep, no problem. I'll have the electrician for the building kind of talk to you. Well, this was like a project building downtown that like the state was dumping a bunch of money into. So he was like kind of taking state money and renovating the whole place at the same time. So I set the Tormach up, and I powered it up off of, what I had available to me, but it was like an extension cord running from like under the other side of the room because we just didn't have anything. We weren't allowed to work on anything. So it actually took 6 months of me pestering this guy weekly, like, hey, I have $15,000 machine sitting up here that I can't run because you're not getting me power. I'll get it to you. So it took me 6 months to realize that this dude was never going to do anything for me. So in the meantime, I had continued to make stuff by hand, and it was like a 15-minute commute down to the shop from like, I work like 7/8 of a mile from my house. So I have like what's going on here and then shops downtown. So my wife's getting frustrated. She's like, you're going down to the shop 4 nights a week, 5 nights a week. You're spending 3 or 4 hours, 5 hours down there. Something's got to change. So I'm getting frustrated. The machine's not running. I'm not allowed to just wire up an outlet myself, which is, ridiculous. And so in my frustration, I just said, hey, I'm moving all this stuff home. I'm building a shop in my basement. It's significantly smaller. I think I can get this machine in pieces down into my basement, and I am going to operate there because at least I'm in complete control of my life. And so after about 2.5 years of working with Chris, actually, no, it was 2 years on the knuckle, I moved everything to my house. And I said goodbye to my best friend and said, hey, the shop is yours. I need to pursue whatever's next for me in this 150 square foot space in my basement. And so I got it all set up. It was just a nook, but it was my nook. And over the course of the next, let's see, so that was 2016 to 2018, 2018 to 2000. So for the next 2 years, I worked out of my basement. And I guess I have to reflect back just a little bit. During this time frame, I went out to California met a mutual friend of ours, Ken Spalding, Zodiac Engineering.
Past guest of the podcast.
Past guest of the podcast. Actually, how I found out about the podcast was like when he was on it. So Ken and I had been friends through Instagram at a distance. I had always admired him through like BMX manufacturing. So I rode BMX from 99 to 2010, and through BMX board, I knew of Ken, and I saw he was making like headset caps and like bearing races and like sprockets and stuff like that. That was like my only experience with like manual machining was just like Ken Spalding making these parts. And actually when I got into knives, he was more of a guy on Instagram that like I admired from a distance and would pester, like he appreciated like what I was doing from like, a knife or a mold making perspective and what have you. But like, we never really connected beyond just like mutually like liking each other's photos. And so when I got into the whole knife making thing, he had been making knives for a while. And so I kind of picked his brain about I didn't really know what he had or how he did it, but grinders and stuff like that, and he kind of steered me in the directions of this is how you kind of start making knives. So he actually invited me out and said, "Hey, I have a shop out here with another friend of mine who's also a knife maker. If you guys want to come out, if you want to come out for a week, Paulo and I will like help you adapt one of your designs to CAD or to a folder in CAD, and we'll show you how to make a folding knife." So I went out to California for a week, and I worked with Paulo and with Ken, and we made a knife together. And
What a killer
so,
opportunity.
dude, it was killer. It was awesome. It was something that like changed my life forever. And I didn't really realize at that time what I was interrupting. You know, Ken was running parts, like that's what he did. That was his day job. And Paulo was a knife maker who, you know, though both those guys took time out of their lives to like let me pretty much be a fly on the wall and like fuck around in their shop and make a knife. And I'd like to think that on some respect they learned some stuff from me. Maybe not a whole lot, and maybe that's me just being a little bit presumptuous. But like I feel like I added a little bit of at least comic relief, if not some value to their shop over that week. But
I'm sure you did. I mean, I would love to be a fly on the wall in a tool and die shop for the same reason, because like that's not my world. So it's always cool to get to, I mean, that's one reason I love this podcast, is to like get to talk to people like you, where it's like, hey, I don't know anything about hard milling, you know, what can you tell me? What's so cool? Like that kind of stuff,
dude.
you know?
Dude, totally, man. And that what's interesting about that is I don't think you have like an appreciation for the other facets of like manufacturing until like you get pretty into your own niche. And then, like, whether it be because you know the right questions to ask, or when you see something happening, you can recognize, like, oh, how are you doing that? Because if I tried to apply what I know, like, I couldn't do that. You know, like, whether it be like another machine or a different material or a setup, you know, I don't think it would be overwhelming if you didn't have experience in the industry. But now, you know, as we've been in this for however long we have, I appreciate everything everybody makes, you know, and I'm constantly amazed, but it also like infinitely increases my thirst for knowledge because I'm fascinated by everything. You know, I don't know if you get that way, but social media makes it so available to just like see things and like and just get enamored with it, right? Like everything's so nichey.
Oh yeah.
But
Well, I mean, that's why, like, we'll go over it later, but that's why I end every episode with asking my guest, you know, what did you research this week? Because everybody on here is, I mean, we're all nerds on this stuff, and we're all looking at something new, and like half the time they say something that I've never heard of, and I'm like, oh well, now I know I'm a rabbit hole for the rest of the night. Like, cool. This
hell
is
yeah,
great.
dude. I love it, man. But let me think here. So fast forward. So Ken had I'd learned how to make folding knives from those guys. I had started to I had two models, the one that I worked with them, and then one that I still make to this day, the transient. And I was making it. I was making it slowly. I was kind of like stuff had picked up at my day job again. You know, I'm back to working 7 days a week, and I'm making knives part time. Sometimes it's 10 hours a week. Sometimes it's 2 hours a week. You know. Also, by this time, I had a fourth child, and being at home was a blessing and a curse, right? Like it's great to be around my family if they need me, but when you're there, they need you a lot more. So, you know, my kids are constantly coming down and need stuff from me, or my wife needs stuff from me, which is great. I mean, honestly, it made it way less stressful because being able to be present to them, you know, it was great. But consequently, it just seemed like I was distracted a lot. And my day job was still paying the bills. I still loved tool and die. And I was finding frustrations within knife manufacturing that I did not experience at my day job. Tolerancing issues, inconsistent manufacturing processes, and a lot of the issues that present themselves in knives. There's not a whole lot of them, but the things that, you know, you struggle with is, you know, blade centering because like your features are not square, parallel, you know, whatever. And I had to like start to ask myself a question like, why am I having these problems? Like I know how to manufacture stuff at at a very precise level. You know, a lot of these tolerances and what we're doing and what I'm making are, you know, a half thousand. So a lot of them are plus 2/10 minus nothing. You know, we're holding tight tolerances on a lot of these parts, and like they're working. So I have to ask myself like, why, why am I not excelling at knife making in the same way that I do at my day job? And that was when I kind of started to explore the fact and accept the fact that I was not married to my process, that I was cutting corners, that I was making a lot of the errors that I think that a lot of guys that make stuff by hand accept. Oh, this is character, or there's no such thing as a scrap knife. A knife maker makes a smaller knife. You know what I mean? Whatever, whatever the mantras are. And I said, I need to start treating this like I treat what I do at my day job. With the same level of reverence to the process, with the same level of dedication to the inspection, and I'm not going to sacrifice quality for time. And that ended up being the biggest and best but worst rabbit hole I ever went down, because I would spend so much time with these knives before they left me, chasing perfection. And ultimately, I think that it helped me because my people, my customers, as I would share this, I'm also like a big on Instagram. I'm big in sharing processes and going through failures and successes and what I'm going on. Like I share a lot of that. And in knives, from a social media perspective, like a lot of guys don't share that the depth, in-depth processes. And that's kind of like where I've found home. But
Yeah, I mean, I definitely appreciate it. Like I watch a lot of your stories where you're talking about, that day's work and that day's struggle, and it's such a stark contrast to companies, even larger companies like Spyderco. If you watch some of their like tours or something, like there are rooms that they don't show.
yeah,
Entire parts of their process that they keep under wraps, and like, you could probably figure out what's going on, but it's really cool to watch your stories where like every little thing is explained, and you do see you struggle and overcome those struggles.
yeah, and I appreciate you taking the time to watch. Ironically, like occasionally I'll put at the end of my like a long story if it's like a 40-story night, and I'll put at the end of it like, if you made it through all the way to the end of this, like, thank you, I see you. Like I look at those people, like, man, there's 600 or 700 of you that really took the time to really watch this all the way through, or you tapped a whole lot and skipped a whole lot of stories in a row to get to the end. But either way, I digress. I decided that I was going to get married to my process. So I'm spending way too much time with these knives. I'm making a knife a month or a knife every other month, which in some cases that hasn't changed. But again, my people started to realize that like I wasn't in this for the money, that I was in this for pushing myself to be the best version of myself that I could be for the product and for the people that I was making it for. And it was when I started to apply that to the knife making process is when I truly fell in love with it. Like I said at the beginning, it was just money. It was just a business. It was just a way to propel my life forward, and I saw a market opportunity. And it just has turned into a labor of love. And everything that I've done since then has been in the pursuit of finding ways to do what I do on a bigger scale without sacrificing any of that quality, and being able to now provide that to other people. One thing that if we hit stop for a second. So I knew with the Tormach that was not going to be, it didn't have a tool, it doesn't have a tool changer. It doesn't have any of the capabilities that you need beyond basically being able to make parts that you need to be able to scale a business with any kind of speed or success. So I knew that I needed a bigger machine. I knew that I needed a bigger space, and I knew that there was really no way that I was going to be able to rent a bigger shop again, pay nearly a mortgage payment in it for it to be outfitted with what I needed power-wise and accessibility-wise, and then also be able to take on a machine payment. So it was kind of like a juxtaposition of, do I just accept what I'm doing as a hobby and continue to work at my day job, or do I really push to find a way to grow this thing that I really love and try and turn it into something more and accept that it's going to be a bigger part of my life? And my wife was pregnant with our 5th child at that time. And this was at the beginning of 2019. So roughly 2 years ago.
How do you find the time to do anything with 5 kids, dude?
You have to have a super wife. That is literally the cheat code. If you do not have an astronomically capable, independent, selfless significant other that is totally on board with your dream and your vision, you will fail. That is, if you want to have a pile of kids. That is just, I can't say it. My wife is She's everything to this. She is the reason that this works. She's the reason why I'm out here. I get out of work now at 4:30 and I'm out here till 8:30 every night. I see my kids for an hour and a half a day. I'm having to tone back now. Like the only reason that that works is because I have an astronomically supportive partner.
That's amazing.
So it is, man. It is. And I am consistently reminded of how lucky I am to have this opportunity. And I really try not to take it for granted. There are times where obviously she feels neglected or she feels like she's not priority number one. And I have to check myself with that. But yeah, so that is the secret, man. You got to have the right partner. And honestly, what's awesome about it now is that as I see my kids, so my oldest is 12, my youngest is 19 months. I see my kids coming out here recognizing what I'm making, recognizing the processes, like starting to show an interest in what I'm doing. And like I said, I came from a white collar household, and I'm really excited to be able to expose my kids to manufacturing in their teen years. Not that it may come from anything may come from it, but I either want them to be 18 and know, hey, maybe I want to pursue something like this in my life, or hell no, I'm going to college. You know what I mean? Like you want them to kind of have exposure to both ends of the spectrum and to be able to maybe go into their lives with just a little bit more of an idea of what's out there for them. Because
Uh, totally.
I don't know about you, but like when I turned 18, it was go to college, or like at graduation they announced you as entering the workforce. You know what I mean? Like it wasn't like that. That was like something that was like, it wasn't a badge of honor by any means. And so, as more and more kids come out of school with student debt, can't get jobs, blah, 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 and as it's becoming more and more acceptable, the entrepreneurial spirit and solving problems and, the availability and accessibility of success in lives with, a plethora of different things that don't revolve around college. I want my kids I really, really aspire for them to just gain a little bit of knowledge from you with regard to this. But so I knew I needed a full size machine. So it was at 19, 20, 21. Damn, was that 3 years ago? Yeah, it was the beginning of 2019. Hard to believe that it's been that long to get to this point. But so I decided that I didn't have any money laying around, and I had kicked around a design for a knife that at that time it was becoming pretty popular to use China to have them manufacture a knife that you designed and then sell it domestically and make a pile of money. And I didn't know how I felt about it because I had watched a lot of work, as a American manufacturing person. I'd seen the Chinese take a lot of work away from different industries, and especially, through Instagram, knowing a lot of guys in a lot of different processes and facets of manufacturing. I had seen a lot of work leave the country, but also come back. And so I didn't know how I felt about capitalizing on China. But I did know that the only way that I was ever going to get the money together to kind of grow my dream in any kind of time was to use this tool. And I've said that a lot of times over the last few years. I use China as a tool, and I really owned that because I think a lot of guys use China as part of their business model, and I just don't think that that's sustainable. I think it's a good way to make money in the short term, but if you put too many eggs in a foreign basket, you lose too much control, and ultimately, I think it'll be the downfall of a lot of people. But so I worked with a Chinese knife manufacturing company, and they were actually very pleasant to work with. They delivered perfectly. But this was right around the time when COVID was breaking out. So I sent my model over to all my CAD models over to this Chinese company. And I said, hey, I want to run these knives. And they said, okay, you need to send us X amount of dollars to prototype them for you. This was, again, January 1st. So I'll say straight up 3 years into my knife making career. And I sent that money to them, and they started making my parts. And at the end of January, we started hearing about this Chinese flu that was coming over, and people were getting sick. And I said, I'm just going to kind of push forward with this. Well, we got into March. And at the beginning of March, they delivered my prototypes. I said, these are wonderful. You guys did a great job. And I had gotten the money together to get the project off the ground. And I sent them $12,000. And they said, okay, we need 90 to 120 days to make these knives for you. Sit tight. And 2 weeks later, they shut everything down.
Oh, jeez.
So I'm thinking to myself, how long is this going to last? Did I make the right decision? A lot of this was saying that it was coming from China. So my fear with regard to like the national climate and relationship to China, how are people going to receive these Chinese made knives when the Chinese flu is whatever? I'm just like overthinking all these associations. How is this going to play out? But at the same time, I had given them a non-refundable deposit and the process had started. So we watched, businesses continue to close. We watched people, losing their livelihood. And in May, when I got word that the knives were finished, I had to open a pre-order to pay for the rest of the manufacturing process. They require 30% down or something like that. So it was the scariest weekend of my life because I was committed to $37,000 worth of knives and I didn't have the money to pay the difference. And I didn't know how the pre-order was going to go. And I didn't know when they were going to be delivered. And I opened the pre-order, and thankfully my people were able to rally around my cause. At this time, I'm sharing with them what I want to do with the money. I'm using China as a tool. I'm going to build a shop. I'm walking around my backyard with my Instagram stories. This is where it's going to go, and this is my dream. And, I'm kind of just pouring my heart out to my people and saying, if you support me, I will follow through with all these commitments. I will take your money. I will use China one time. And as I want to increase my domestic manufacturing capabilities, I want to bring more industry, my small piece of industry, back to the United States. And I want to be able to offer that to you guys. It's not a story that's unique, but it was my story. And so these people rallied around me, and I was able to raise the money that I needed to pay for the rest of the manufacturing process, which was, it was such a weight lifted off my shoulders. And so I sent the money to China, and the problem we were still having is that you couldn't get anything here from there.
Mm-hmm.
Like the logistics of receiving your stuff, it was like, man, some guys were getting their stuff in bits and pieces via air freight, and then other guys had their stuff sitting on boats for 3 months and they weren't getting it. You know what I mean? And it was a little bit unnerving, but I kind of just impressed to my contact at the manufacturing company in China that this was really important to my livelihood, and they found a way to get me the knives in 5 weeks.
Wow, that's killer.
It was killer, man. I was, it was the one of the hardest, 6 weeks of my life, but it was the most gratifying and something I know that I'll never do again because I never want to go through those sleepless nights of hoping that while I had tens of thousands of dollars of people's money on the line, that I was in complete, I'm a control freak like a lot of guys, and I was in zero control of it. I'm actually getting like a little bit, I'm stammering now just because I'm remembering the anxiety that I had at that time. So anyhow, the knives landed in June, and I did not sell anywhere near enough of them pre-sale to build my shop. But I knew, based on the time frame of putting the shop up, that I had to get this process started if there was any way that I was going to get this building even halfway finished by winter. And I know, you're in Arizona, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, down there, I think construction can pretty much happen year round. Up here, once the snow and cold hits, good luck.
Right.
The logistics just become infinitely more difficult. So the knives landed. I think I had like enough money beyond the cost of the production to like get the shell of the building up. And I was like, well, I'm just going to have to get these knives in hand, and I'm just going to have to sell them and work on the shop as I sell them. So the knives get here. I pretty much spend enough time to QC them to make sure that I didn't want to spend a dime of this money until I at least knew that they were good. Like I couldn't, if I was going to have to refund people because these knives were pieces of junk, I had to figure that out first. So I started QCing them. I had no issue at all. It was great. And so I broke ground on the shop here, the one I'm sitting in now. And a buddy of mine got the shell of it built. And in 2 weeks, he had a couple of guys come in, and I previously had the groundwork done. We got it flat, and, I got all my permitting and all that stuff. The shop went up, but it was not in my budget to have anybody else do any of the work but me. And people that were willing to sacrifice their time to help me get this done.
Right.
And I am not a carpenter. I don't know about you, but I'm not a carpenter.
Oh, no.
But I had all the tool I had acquired, through home renovation and all this stuff. I had acquired most of the tools. And I had a lot of friends that were good enough at all the individual processes that I felt like, man, if I, hit the pause button on making knives for 6 months. So this was at the end of June, and like I was trying to finish it by the end of the year. So I stopped making knives entirely, and I spent the next 6 months framing out, insulating, drywall, all the stuff that goes along with putting a shop up. And I had a half a dozen of the best people in my life spend hours and hours and hours out here with me, being their grunt for next to no money, working with me on finishing this shop. And also another thing to consider was that I got all the quotes for the shop like at the front end of COVID. Well, by the time that the shop was going up, everything had doubled in price, tripled in price. It was just like something that was supposed to cost $40,000 cost $70,000, by the end of it all or whatever it ended up being.
Oh yeah.
And so half the battle was sourcing material, right? Like calling around places, having stuff come in from an hour away or further, driving to get material, just trying to scrape together every penny that I could to make it go as far as I possibly could. So yeah, that started in January of 19. In January of 2020, do I have my time frame right here? No, shit. I
Was this
totally botched that.
2021?
I totally botched it, man. So I started this the beginning of 2020 and then at the beginning of 2021, so a year ago. Yeah, man. So, man, I totally blew that. This is time strings together, man. You got to cut me a little slack here. But anyways, so all of 2020 was spent building the shop. I finished the shop in January of 2021, about a year ago. Got the furnace in, air conditioning, blah, blah, blah. Moved everything in the winter from my basement out to this shop. Got everything kind of set up. But I really did spend like 8 months not making anything. And that was hard because I'd kind of begun to define who I was by what I made. And here I was sharing with my people a bunch of carpentry that they didn't care about and my woes of the process. And I had to find a way to like reintegrate myself into the manufacturing process. And in the meantime, I kind of had some catastrophic stuff happen with the Tormach, and I had some obligations to guys that were, some commitments that I made based on knives that I wanted to deliver. And I had the shop up and I'm trying to figure out how am I going to make this stuff? What am I going to do here? I need to get a machine, but how am I going to make that happen? And so it probably was April of 2020 no, I lied. It was in February of 2021. February of 2021, I was at a weekend with family, and my uncle, who's a lawyer locally, said to me he had seen the shop and he'd kind of seen, what I was going through and, some of the people that I had connected with through knives, whatever was impressive to him at that time. And he said to me, hey, if you're ever looking for money, I think what you're doing is pretty awesome. I bet you I can find a guy to invest in you. And so that was in February, and like 2 months later in April, I approached him and I said, hey, my shop's done. Do you still think that you could find somebody to put some money into what I'm doing? And he kind of come over and check it out. And he said, well, did you ever think about, privately financing it, through machine tool sales companies or whatever? Well, if we reflect back to COVID, my wife lost her job. My debt to income ratio changed drastically when that happened. And I just said, hey, man, I don't think there's any way that I could leverage my business or my current personal financial situation into getting financing through any of these machine tool companies. And he said, fair enough. I get it. Yep. Let me see what I can do. So he kind of went through his contacts and kind of pitched who I was and what I was trying to do to some of his, guys that were just looking for creative ways to spend their wealth, I guess. That's what I like to think of it, right? Like we're not talking $500,000 here, but we're talking enough to buy a machine.
Right.
And so he found somebody. And in the meantime, a friend of mine locally was selling his Haas. He was getting something bigger. He was getting a VF4 SS, I think he got. And he had a Super Mini Mill too. And so I said to him, hey, he actually approached me ironically, like while this was going on, and said, hey, if you know anybody that wants to buy my Super Mini Mill 2, aka do you want to buy my Super Mini Mill 2? Let me know. And so I said, hey, man, ironically, I got some money from this investor. Let's do it. So over the course of the next 6 weeks, as the investment was getting finalized and he was ordering his new Haas, and I was kind of starting to do all the stuff that I needed to get the machine in here, which was, obviously power and air and just kind of relaying out the shop, and that all came together. The machine got here at the beginning of July. And again, this was not something that at my day job I ever experienced. Like I watched riggers set machines and I watched our corporate electricians and maintenance people come in and set them all up. Like this was never anything I had done myself. And so it was just another learning curve, which has been special, right? Like this whole shop, it's given me this like intense appreciation for everything that everybody does everywhere. Like I built a box that stays warm and cool and has power. And I think about these like incredibly intricate homes that people build or whatever it is. Like there's an art to everything and it's beautiful. It's beautiful that we do it all here. But anyways, I got the machine in July, and in the meantime, a friend of mine had approached me and said, "Hey, I saw you're getting a machine, and I'd love to do a project with you because I think that the stuff that you make is awesome, and I think that what you want to do with making stuff in America is pretty cool too, and I don't want to use China for what this project is. Would you ever consider making parts for me?" So I'm thinking to myself, you know what? I think that's pretty cool. I'd love to find a way to pay for the machine that's not reliant on me finishing knives myself, right? Because if we float back 2.5 years, I spend way too much time on each knife on the hand finishing side of it. And it's really scary for me to think about being responsible for this investor payment with something that I don't know if it's going to take me 5 hours or 20 hours to finish, right? Because who knows how anal I'm going to be that day. And so he said to me, "Hey, I want to finish everything myself, but I would love to have you make the parts." And so we started kicking around the idea. I started running the numbers, how much each unit would cost and, what he was looking at doing per month, how much time he wanted to commit to it. And I said, "Hey, you know what? I think this could work, man. I think that making parts for you is going to work. It's going to be great." And it was at that time that I kind of realized that I had come full circle. I had gone from working in a manufacturing environment to working on knives completely handmade to blending machine-made parts with hand finishes on my own knives, and now here I am back to manufacturing knife parts without any hand finishing. And ultimately, that's what I love. I love machining. I love making things. I love the process. I love improving the process and everything that goes along with that. So that was actually when I decided that HMC Knives was going to become HMC MFG because my focus was going to shift from making my own knives to finding a way to give my guys that I know that made knives by hand a domestic alternative to making a production knife, something that other people have done. But I think what happens is a lot of guys that set out to make knives for other people realize that if they just make them for themselves, they're going to make more money.
Right.
Because there's no middleman, right? And I was okay with making less money if I was adding value to my friends' careers. And I also recognize that like the hardest part of making a finished product is finishing it. And so if you can eliminate that side of it, you eliminate a lot of stress and a lot of equipment requirements and a lot of processes. If it's just, hey, they leave the machine, I put them together, I make sure everything fits together nicely, and I ship it off, and I can and my people are willing to pay me what I require from an hourly perspective for machine time, and then they can turn around and they can put their time into it and they feel like they can still make money. We're scratching each other's backs here. And I just saw a lot of my friends that are crazy capable, crazy talented, but that really have no way to scale, right? Like either they work more or they hire somebody, because if they can make 2 knives a week by hand and that's what their 45 or 50-hour work week allows, I mean, how are they going to do anything more than that? How do they bolster their income? How do they grow? And in the meantime, I did still want to make knives by hand, but I did the math on it. I'm like, man, if I can have these guys' parts running while I'm finishing my own knives, like, man, that's 1 + 1 = 2. This is great. I can add value to these guys' lives. I can watch them grow their businesses, and I can continue to do what I love. And more importantly, I can find a way to scale back on the hours that I'm giving my day job on my own terms, rather than them cutting me off or, me, because I was bound to I'm bound to the income just like anybody that works a lot of overtime is. That paycheck, when you work 30 hours of overtime a week for a decade, like that's just what your salary is. Like people will say live on 40 hours, right? Like live within your means. But in today's economic climate, wages don't increase with inflation, and before you know it, everything that you have is dependent on what you're making. Yeah, I mean, yeah. And so it was cool. I was like, man, in the meantime, like I am feeling like a prisoner to my day job in some respects. Like I'm a slave. Like, I put myself in a position to where I rely on them, but they've also, you know, put me in a position where they rely on me, and I wanted to start to step back from that. I, as I the roller coaster of life with them was ultimately like we expect everything from you, but when we don't have stuff for you to do, like we don't really care that we're going to rip the rug out from under you because that's just business. And I didn't like that roller coaster. I didn't like the person that I was when I was riding it. And so I kind of saw this as a way for me to kind of like, hey, there's an income potential here. The machine's here. I got enough guys that I can keep the machine running that are interested. Like, let's just kind of go this route and I'll start to taper off of my day job. And that's been great. It's been, I guess I could say, I was forced into it. Ironically, I made that choice. And then this last August, stuff dried up again. All the overtime went away. Perfect timing, right? Like the machine's here in July. We're completely cut off from overtime in August. My budget takes a crazy shock, but I'm gifted this time to like really invest myself in understanding the Haas machine control and writing up, tweaking my post and just all the things that I needed to do that if I was still working 70 hours a week, I wouldn't have been able to do. And so, a couple of months ago, that overtime at work started to kind of creep back, and I kind of decided that I was going to maintain the path that I've been on, which was not giving them weekends anymore and really, investing in myself.
Good for you.
Yeah, thanks, man. It's again, like, I know a lot of the guys that you have on the podcast have been in business for a while or a lot further along in their own ventures and are a lot more established as we're like, I'm still relatively new to it. I have one machine and I still do work a day job and I'm not like setting out and developing like a lean strategy for my home shop. You know what I mean? Like whatever it is, like the upper tier of owning your own business. But, it's really only been, I could say probably, 6 months since this became a really big part of my equation and potentially could be maybe my only job in the future. I'm not sure yet what I want to do with that, but
we all got to find our own balance and path. You've got, I think anybody who has sat here to this point and listened to your entire backstory, they know you have a lot going on, and like you're not an absentee father or husband either. Like you it's clear from your Instagram you make time for your family, and to do all that and make all these knives and build a building and all that, like I think you found a really good balance so far, and it's clearly, at least for now, making you happy. So I there's nothing to make excuses for at all.
Oh yeah, dude. No, honestly, I have no excuse to be made for anything that I've done in my life, like in my adult life, anyways. It's all been, everything's built on everything, and it's all happened for a reason, and positives and negatives, whatever. I used to kind of like think that regrets were a thing or hindsight and that, and it's like, man, I just live looking forward now. I'll try and learn from the past, but sometimes you got to keep a blinders on and focus on consistent improvement. But
Definitely.
yeah, it's been great, man. The response has been pretty overwhelming to what we're doing here. Like I know, like I said, I don't probably don't follow too much in knives, but in recent years there hasn't been a lot going on, with I don't think with what I'm trying to do, which is high-end precision manufacturing. These knives that I'm making for my people, these knife parts, they get the same level of care and attention as like my custom knives do. I don't skip, no stone unturned. My cycle time is important, but it's not that important. I want to make these things, I want to have all the features, and I don't want to skip anything. But it may be not necessarily like, there's a thing, right? Like in knives, like there's this idea of what they call a midtech, which is like where, a guy has parts outsourced to another person, and usually it's like a dumbed down version of their custom knife, but it's cheaper and more available. And like it allows like the handmade guy to kind of scale a little bit. But usually those knives aren't, in my opinion, like a reflection of like the quality of what these makers are capable of. And I wanted to be able to put my spin on this stuff and say, hey, when the knife leaves the maker's hands, I don't want the end customer to feel any difference between like what their custom work was and what I'm putting out from a manufacturing standpoint. And that's really been like what my mantra has been, which is like, let's set a new precedent here, for what a couple of people collaborating in a production environment in knives can achieve. And so it's been cool to see guys, handmade friends of mine, people that I don't even know that well kind of approach me like, hey, I'm really aligning with what you're offering here. We have all American, it's an entirely American made knife. There's logistics involved here that, these like knife making guys don't understand. I don't think a lot of the times, like all the manufacturing processes and like what would go into, making all the components and stuff. Like if it wasn't for me working with them, like who are they going to go to? How do they even find a person? So it's been kind of cool to kind of to be the bridge between like handmade guys and just like domestic manufacturing. But yeah, there's a validation in it, man. And like there's I think this is going to be something going forward that's even more and more popular in like this small niche thing that is knife making. Guys that, want high level parts, high quality parts that they can kind of like base their lives around. Like, you know, you can have a solid base income from this, right? Like, oh, I'm going to spend a week of my month finishing these 10 or 15 knives from this guy. And like, I know that I have like a $50,000 income that like I can base the decisions on the rest of my business on. It's like consistent and it's not revolving around like what I'm making by hand. I think there's like a cool stability there that's like attractive to guys that, whose livelihood just depends on how much they can make in a given week themselves in their garage or in their shop. And so it's exciting for me to be a part of like other people's solutions. Does that make sense? Like, does that
Yeah, no, I think it's like a reimagining of what a mid tech is. Like I like that a lot.
Yeah, exactly. Like this isn't a new concept, like it's not, we're not totally reinventing the wheel here, but given like just the global economic climate and what's acceptable, and I say that in air quotes because obviously, what's one person's definition of acceptance is different from another's, but I just think that like what's the cliche saying right now? A rising tide raises all ships, right? Like
Correct.
if we can find the infrastructure for this and set the tone for what people expect in the future, like we're just going to see everything improve and expectations change. I hope anyways. Maybe that's just delusions of grandeur, but I think we can make a difference.
No, I definitely think so.
So yeah, that's right. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say, so we had a few questions from the audience for you as well. The first one you had kind of touched on, but if there's any, maybe one or two driving things, DFM Toolworks asked, what have you carried over from your work into your business and vice versa? So are there any, maybe one driving thing that you've taken from each and carried into the other?
I don't think the lot of my knife making, the stuff that I've learned via knife making translated back to my day job, because a lot of those processes are pretty set in stone, right? I would think that maybe patience, it's not a manufacturing skill, but it's a virtue, and understanding while working with other people through my knife making journey has kind of allowed me to have a little bit more compassion to like my expectation to the people that I work with. But with regard to how my day job affected knife making, like I touched on, when I accepted that quality should know no bounds and that it should be applied to everything that you do, like I said, that there's no room for error at my day job. Why would I ever allow that in my knife making career? So like when I just embodied that part of it, which was we don't leave any stone unturned, and if we see a flaw, we fix it, and nothing leaves our hands without being as absolutely perfect as we can possibly make it, which is obviously the standard at work. That changed my perspective on making knives. And that would be the biggest carryover, I think.
Awesome. Skiff Workshop asked, what did you forget to include in your new building, and what would you take out if you did it again?
So I definitely wouldn't take anything out.
That's good.
What do they say? They only make shops in one size, half the size you need them to be. So the first and foremost is I would make it bigger. So it's 1,200 square feet. It's only 30, which at that time was what I could afford. And if I could double it, I would, because I'm looking at it now. And what was supposed to be just a shop ended up being my gym, and it ended up being my archery work area where I have all my, so I'm a big archery hunter, and all my stuff for working on bows is out here. And I have a little lounge area with an old sectional from the house with the TV where like on Saturday nights, my kids and wife come out and we have movie night. Like that's our tradition. Like I live in a small house, right? 5 kids, and I live in a 1,700 square foot house. So this shop ended up becoming like the catch-all for like everything that I am passionate about. And so if I could do it again, I would accept that your shop is going to be an extension of who you are, and it's going to be an ever evolving organism. And if you can add extra space to allow that to happen, I think you should, because it's never cheaper to do it than when you do it the first time, right? Adding on is never any less expensive than doing it the first time. But one thing that I don't have that I wish that I did was a room for my compressor to be outside of this shop room
Oh
because
man, yeah.
like anybody that has a big compressor knows, like they kick on often and they're loud unless you have a screw compressor. So that's like definitely one of the things that I'm doing this year is building a soundproof room outside of the shop, and I'm going to run the air outside. And another thing that I underestimated was power. You know, I had a dedicated line, 200 amp line of service run out here, and like pretty quickly, like you look at it, I have a 30 horsepower phase converter in here for the machine. I also run my 3-phase compressor off of a VFD instead of having to route it into the phase converter. But like anything that's 220 or 3-phase or single phase, like just sucks power. And like a lot of these things are all running at the same time, right? Like the power demands are exponential. So somebody that's building a shop with the idea that they want to have CNC machines in it, like whatever you can do to get the most power you possibly can, just get it. You know, you're never going to regret having too much power in a place. And, you know, things that you don't think about, heating and cooling costs. Like my place is really well insulated, but I didn't spray foam insulate it. I put batted insulation in the walls, and I have a 65,000 BTU furnace. There's other things I didn't think about, man. Like, okay, this space is 1,200 square feet with 12-foot ceilings, but when you buy a 3-ton air conditioning unit, doesn't take into account the fact that when the compressor motor's running and when the machines are running, those things put off a hell of a lot of heat.
They sure
You
do.
know, so those are things that like maybe we don't think about, or I didn't think about as like just a residential person. So make sure that you scale your HVAC equipment for whatever you're planning on doing within the shop confines, like that. Those are things that there was nobody to coach me through. Nothing that my HVAC guy knew. Like he didn't know. You know, like what do you? As far as he's concerned, I'm just a guy hanging out in a shop. He doesn't know what I'm doing in here. So those are costly things to do over, right? Thousands and thousands of dollars to go back and say, man, I wish I would have gotten a bigger furnace and a bigger air conditioning unit. So yeah, I mean, that's really all that I have. Nothing specific. I really did put a lot of time and thought into this building for as much as I could. And I pride myself on that. There really isn't too much I would change, I don't think.
That's awesome. I mean, that's, I feel like those are very common complaints or missteps that everyone makes. Like I've
Sure.
never heard somebody build a house and go, "Oh, yep, I built the exact right size house." You know, they have another kid or they take up a new hobby or something, and they're like, "Oh man, I really should have added that extra, 500 square feet or 1,000 square feet or whatever." So,
Absolutely, man.
yeah, that's great that there's no single thing that has been affecting you day to day.
Yeah, dude, because I mean, I don't know how you are, but like if there was some glaring issue that was like major, I'd be so pissed that like you spend tens of thousands of dollars on a place like this, and then like there's just something that you just like a total misstep. You're like, how did I miss this thing that is like affecting my quality of life and my, how I'm trying to use this place every day? So luckily enough, I don't have to deal with, the self-hatred and loathing that would come from something like that.
Well, good. And then the last question we had, kind of tongue in cheek, from MX Pimp, Mr. Clayton Miller. He asked, "Who's your favorite bearded barbecue pitmaster from Texas?"
Oh yeah, dude, Clayton's awesome. He's another guy that I've known for years, through Ken too. They're pals also. And that's one of those, knives are interesting, right? Like the places that it's taken me and the people that I've met, it's not manufacturing based by any means, but like I made knives for a TV personality in the archery world, right? Like some of this stuff's connected. Like I'm into archery and I'm into making knives, and make knives for him. And through him, mutual friend, somehow I got hooked up. Like I don't know if you're familiar with Traeger, but like Traeger grills. So through them, like Traeger hit me up years ago. Shoot, it's probably been 4 years now. I was like, hey, we think what you're doing is pretty cool. You into this whole like influencer thing? And I'm not. I never was, but I definitely thought what they were doing was cool. And they're like, hey, if you want to make some Instagram posts, we'd love to send you some stuff. And so they sent me a grill, and it like completely changed like how I view food. I never cooked anything, and then before you know it, I'm smoking all kinds of stuff and like expanding my culinary horizons, and like meet people through barbecue. People that are into knives, and there's like this weird correlation to like the connectivity of social media and stuff that you would never would consider to be interrelated. And for as much as I've been grateful and ecstatic to build like contacts within, the knife world or in manufacturing, like it's been the guys through archery and through Traeger and through barbecue and through like my other side passions that like get to know me through knives also, like just the connections that I found between all these people that's like really made this whole thing worthwhile. Like what the value added to my life beyond money and beyond the satisfaction of making things is like all the people that have come into my life from all these different facets of that ultimately stems from making knives though. And if I wasn't making knives and sharing it online, none of these other things would have come into place and all these people I never would have met. So I don't take for granted all the awesome opportunities that I've had as a result of making knives, whether it be friendships or partnerships or what have you. It's very special. And, I'm really excited to look back on my life and just think of all the opportunity that we've had, like, as a result of just like what the internet has brought to our lives, whether it's meeting you and doing this podcast or whatever, man. It's been a true pleasure, and I can't wait to see what unfolds in the rest of my life as a result of what I'm doing now. So
Yeah.
sorry to get long-winded on you. And that is, I will take time to apologize for 2 seconds, man. I know you get a lot of people that talk, but man, you get me going. And I sometimes don't know how to include somebody else in a conversation, man. So I appreciate you listening to me for the last hour and a half at the very least.
No. I love people who have a lot to say. Like it's great to talk to somebody so passionate because it makes me feel that passion. And I go in tomorrow at the shop and I feel revved up and ready to make more cool stuff.
Dude, isn't that the truth, man? Like sometimes stuff gets so monotonous, right? Like you're coming in doing the same thing, encountering the same problems, or fixing problems, or thinking you're fixing problems, only to encounter a new one, and like you get burned out, and then all of a sudden, like you listen to the right person talk. Whether I'm listening to Business and Machining, or I'm listening to Within Tolerance, or I'm listening to somebody else that's not doing CNC related stuff, but like their drive and their passion just like reignites in me, like whatever it was that got me into this in the first place. And so I totally get what you're saying with that. That re-energizing is when you're pouring yourself into something 100% every day, like that. It's almost like a little bit of a respite, like a rest day when you get motivation off of somebody else's passion. So
Yeah, totally. Well, that brings us to shop news and new things. Is there any new models of knives you want to plug? Really anything, new tools you like? But what's going on that's new?
to be honest, I'm still in the throes of like utilizing what I have. And I'm at a point now where, and I think a lot of people, maybe this affects a lot of people, maybe it doesn't, but I got very used to at my day job when you're spending corporate money, getting to try a lot of stuff, within tooling and work holding. And it kind of drove a pretty big sense of like materialism in me where I felt like I wasn't really progressing in manufacturing if I wasn't trying like new approaches to things, if I wasn't reinventing wheels. And now that I am here paying for everything myself, it makes me really focus on getting the most out of what I have and really feeling like I exhausted all my opportunities. So I'm having to actively decide to not look at new work holding, to not look at new tooling, to say, hey, you need to kick as much ass as you can with what you have before spending another buck on something else. So with regard to that, there's really nothing new. I'm still learning new stuff about my machine every day that I run it. With regard to like knife stuff, I am working on, so like the first project for the machine was what was called the Mac Sonic Doom, and we're calling it Mac as in machine assisted custom.
Oh, okay. I like
And
that.
it's kind of cool, right? Like technically these knives leave the maker's hands as a custom, but they get all the touches, but a machine did some of the work. And it's been a kind of a cool way to denote, because a lot of these guys still make whatever the knife model is that I'm making, they still make it customly. We're just making like the Mac version. So it's an easy way to differentiate between the custom and the Mac version. That was something that my first customer, my buddy Brian Efros, kind of coined. And it's a cool way to shorten stuff up, and it's been pretty well received by his people, and I think it's going to stick. So yeah, the Mac, we call it the Mac Doom, was this first model, and then now I'm working on the Mac Crusade with another guy, a guy named Ian Pekarsky. He owns CMF Metalworks, so he's been somebody that I think we're like in the same, I would call it quote unquote like maker class. Like we kind of started making knives around the same time. Maybe he was a little bit, maybe 6 months or a year after me. But like I said, it's been important for me to work on these projects with guys that I know. So I'm working on the Mac Crusade with Ian, and then I am doing a project with my friend John Sorensen, who owns Rotten Design, and he's another big, crazy handmade guy that just puts way too much of himself into every knife. But we're working out the kinks on a version of his Evolution model, which is going to be the Mac Evo. And then finally, to take it full circle, my best friend and original knife partner, Chris, Pariah Knives, and I are developing an integral fixed blade, which we are going to release. So those are my four projects that I kind of have in the fire. And that's what the people that are interested have to look forward to, are these four knife models. So that's pretty much, integrating those into production is like really what the rest of like 2022 is going to look like for me. And that's honestly something that I've never really done with knives, is I've never really planned that far ahead. I've always kind of just made what I was making at that time, and most of my logistical effort went into my day job, and then I came here to relax and make stuff. And now, you know, as this grows, it demands more forethought and more planning. And so I think 2022 is going to be a great year. I think we're going to have fun with it, and that's what I have in the fire, man.
That's awesome. Yeah, that sounds like I'm glad that the Mac project seems like it's really starting to pick up for you, and I I love the moniker, and I really look forward to seeing what other Mac knives come out of your shop.
Yeah, thanks, man. It's funny, as you start to forecast, like it's pretty quickly becomes obvious that like having another machine or two machines and either quitting my job or finding a way to hire somebody that like knows, the ins and outs of what we're doing, like it becomes pretty viable pretty quickly. It's kind of crazy when you start to crunch the numbers, and like what you thought was going to be, man, I'm just going to be me in this shop by myself for the rest of my life. Like, man, with the right processes in place and one like-minded person, man, this can grow quickly. You see guys, that just grow so exponentially, and you wonder how they handled it. And then it's like, yeah, I mean, if you make something that's a good product and there's a lot of demand for it, it's really not that hard to justify scaling. That's for sure.
Yeah, totally.
So,
Well, that brings me to the last question I ask every guest, which is, what did you research this week? And it can be anything from, how to cook something in your Traeger to baby stuff to machining stuff and anything in between. What's been popping up in Google or whatever search browser you're using.
honestly, it's kind of cool that you would kind of preface that by saying that like it doesn't have to be machining related right now. So it's been baby stuff, but it's been health related. So like I got to plug my sister, and for all the people that are religiously minded, man, a prayer or two would go a long way. She has been having grand mal seizures like weekly for 5 years, and 2 weeks ago she had very invasive brain surgery and had several sections of her brain removed. These where they believe the epicenters of these seizures are. And I can't begin to imagine, she lives in Colorado, and she's been living with something, that I couldn't fathom living with. And sorry, it makes me kind of emotional to think about, just because she's been such a trooper and has the surgery that hopefully is going to redefine her life as she knows it. And so I have spent a lot of time kind of under the radar researching, what she's going through, what the rest of her recovery is going to look like. And yeah, it something like that makes me appreciate every day that I have doing what I selfishly do. And, to end on a note that I think that a lot of people, and myself included, take that stuff for granted, man. And we're lucky to live in America. We're lucky to have the opportunities that we have. We're lucky to be healthy. And we remind ourselves, whether it's through COVID or situations like this, health stuff or otherwise, that can all be gone in an instant. So focus on the good shit. I always say focus on the good shit. Focus on the good shit in your life, and do everything you can to share that good shit with the people around you. So that's that's what I've been researching this week, man.
Wow. Well, yeah. I mean, I'm sure we will all keep her in our thoughts and prayers. I'm glad that it was a successful surgery, and it
Yep.
sounds like she's doing all right. So that's great to hear. And yeah, I'm sorry that she was going through that, but I'm definitely glad that she's on the road to mending.
Yeah, dude, sorry to get you off guard with that. It's just been on my mind a lot lately. And really, she and I, you know, she's 3 years younger than me, and in a lot of ways, never really connected, And my life has been on like such a selfish, private trajectory for the last 10 years that like I didn't really spend a whole lot of time like staying connected to, people in a way, her especially in a way that I should have. And so again, I think that all the more hits home for that, right? Is that it's like easy to lose contact or easy to lose touch with people that you love and care about on whatever journey you're on in your life. And it's just a brief reminder that sometimes you just gotta take the time to stay connected to the people that you love and remember that like even if you're on the best journey of your life and you're growing in all directions, sometimes you gotta stay grounded, right? You gotta stay humble and you gotta stay grounded. So that's where I'll end it, man.
Definitely. Well, Jim, thank you so much for taking the time. I mean, I know that, especially now after 2 hours of hearing everything you got going on, I cannot believe you were able to give me a couple hours of your time. So I really appreciate that. It was great to get to know you a little bit better, kind of put a voice to the face and really get a one-on-one with you. Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, Dylan, thank you too, man. You popped my podcast cherry, like I said to you at the beginning of this. It's been a pleasure. Like, obviously, I'll reflect. I don't even know if I'll listen to this because I don't think I want to hear myself talk for 2 hours, but I appreciate the opportunity and the platform, and I love what you do. I love the value that you add. I think that in today's day and age that there's podcasts are a dime a dozen, and there are not very many that make an impact on how like I live my life and how I view my small niche world. And within tolerance has definitely become one of those ones that means a lot to me. And I really look forward to everything you release. So thank you for doing your thing, man. I appreciate you.
Oh man, I really appreciate that. That's why I love doing this, is to try and bring us all together. So thank you for those kind words.
Sure, man.
And speaking of that, Patreon thank yous, new ones are now Linus and Reese. Thank you so much for everyone who backs this, because it allows me to send people like Jim a headset so that we can have these conversations and you guys get good audio. And just it helps me dedicate as much time as I possibly can to making this as good for everyone as possible. So thank you all for backing it. And thanks again, Jim. I'll be back next week.